Try again. My name is still Jay Goldmintz, and I am here. I am a bad substitute for Rabbi Yehuda Chanelis, who was really the one who was supposed to make this presentation, but unfortunately got COVID and at the last minute was unable to attend. And so at the last minute, last night, I became the substitute. So please don't judge the program based on my presentation. Yehuda and I have recently become colleagues, and we've talked about this project over time, but he's really the one who's responsible for really getting it going and potentially helping it to find a root in American education. What if we went around the room quickly and I just asked you if you could just give me a number from 1 to 10, where 1 is I would much rather be home in bed, and 10 is I'm just like so incredibly excited to be here. I can hardly wait to hear what you have to say. What number would you give yourself? Sir?
I'll go with 8.5.
There's always somebody who has a half. You know, it's like
9.
9.
Yeah, I'll go with a 9.
Wow, such a positive crowd. 8.
I'm a 10.
A 10. I always thought of you as a 10. Yes, yes. 11. Oh, finally an honest person. Yes. Okay. Okay. Wow. So, okay, I teach high school. I never see those numbers, or seldom. And what if I asked you to explain your number? That is to say, why you're feeling the way you are and what the missing piece is really all about. What if I asked each of you, in line with the previous speaker this morning, what if I asked each of you your Hebrew name and tell me where your Hebrew name comes from and how it connects to your family and how you connect to that name? What if I asked you to describe a moment that you experienced this week that you would classify as kadosh, as holy? What if I asked you to do that with your experience here, just for the last day or so? What would you answer? Name one thing in your personal life right now that you would have to leave, you would want to leave outside the door in order to be totally present in the moment. Imagine asking those questions in a classroom at least once a week of a class. And what would that do to the dynamic of the class? How would it contribute to your understanding of your classmates? How might it change the way you interact with your classmates? What then if I asked on any given week one of you to come forward and to share with the rest of the class something personal, something about you that nobody else knows? It could be something funny that happened to you. It could be a hobby. It could be something you're struggling with. It could be a musical instrument that you play that nobody knows. It's just something of you that you would share with the rest of the group. How would that change the dynamic? And what if, after telling your story, I then asked you to share a dilemma, something you're struggling with that week, and it doesn't have to be a deep struggle, just a question that you have, and I asked the rest of the class to respond and to reflect. Doing that in a group once a week sounds a lot like a guidance program, a social emotional kind of encounter that you would have any week with in a class, in a school. But what then if I did a short exercise, an avodah, as we call it, an avodat halev, or an avodat pnimit, an internal exercise that we could also share with the group. Something that speaks to your relationship with God, something that's rooted in Parshat HaShavua or in a halacha or something that we learned together during the week. And what if that became the focus of our discussion? The rationale here is that the ben adam lechavero relationship has the potential to be a portal to the ben adam lemakom relationship. it's this weekly meeting that we call Lev HaShavua is an outgrowth of a program from Israel called Lifnai V'Lifnim that's run by, it's really part of a master's program that's run in Israel by Rabbi Dov Singer, if you know the name, who's the principal of Makor Chaim High School in Israel and one of the leaders of the so-called Neo-Hasidic movement in Israel, and his son Yishai, who have turned this kind of experiential learning and sharing into a framework that can be adopted and adapted into schools. It's about kids being able to interact not just with one another, but with the texts that they learn in a personalized way, learning the texts in order to internalize them. It means sort of slowing down the learning that we're doing so that there's time to spend on exploring what these texts have the potential to mean for them. It's not alone what you get on the test, but rather how the material tests you. And it's not how you respond to the test, but how you respond to the text. It sort of builds students' inner world. It cares about what's going on internally rather than just what's going on in terms of learning the tochen. And if you want to see an example of this, people's laptops are not open, that's okay. If you look on the drive, you'll see that there's one exercise there that speaks about Megillat Ruth. It's a midrash that talks about the Redeemer appearing at the gate of the town with Boaz, and the midrash says that Boaz did his part, Ruth did her part, Naomi did her part, and so HaKadosh Baruch Hu comes and says that I too will do my part. And then what follows are questions that sort of what does it mean that God did his part, and what does it mean that people did their parts? But then the most important part that comes is at the end when the questions say, when do I expect that God will be part of my life? What do I do? What is my asiyah mishali? What do I hope that God in turn will do? And think of a time or a place in your work or in your life that you might invite God to be a part of your life at that moment. And what would that look like for you? In other words, it's, as you could see, it's taking any piece of text that you're learning and trying to find the best way to leverage it into asking kids questions so that they can ask those questions of themselves and search for the relevance for themselves. When I first started teaching, I thought I was brilliant when I taught something in Yirmiyahu and I said, what do you think Yirmiyahu's message would be for today? And when you ask questions like that, it's so easy to deflect them with coming up with answers that you think the teacher wants to hear, but it's totally separate from the way you feel about it. And the questions instead have to be about you. And in fact, there's a whole pedagogy surrounding these kinds of questions and this kind of approach to text. In another initiative that JEIC has helped fund, that's been taking place in my school separate from this work, is working with an organization in Israel called Lev LaDat, that has turned this into a pedagogy of how do you ask different tiered levels of questions so that you can eventually get to the personalization, because it's not something that you can just jump into all at once. I'll give you an example. I don't know, when I would teach a class about Shabbat and Kiddushat Shabbat, the holiness of Shabbat, and I'll give kids a piece by Rabbi Sachs that speaks about the definition of holiness. So in the past, I might have asked that, and I might have done commentaries on it in Tanakh. And today I ask, have you ever experienced that kind of holiness in your Shabbat? And what does it look like? How would you explain it to somebody who's never seen it? And have you ever felt that kind of holiness someplace else in your life? Have you ever experienced it? And what does it look like? And depending on the class, I may provide the opportunity for people to sit around and share about it, and share it, so that the language is a language that's accepted in the classroom. This is no small matter. There's all kinds of research that has been done. I started in England, I think, when they say that human beings are innately spiritual. So if we're innately spiritual, what happens to all those people that we think aren't so spiritual? And the answer is that it's suppressed when kids are younger, when kids go to adults and ask them questions or marvel at something, and the adults in their lives don't respond, or they ignore it, or they don't seem interested in answers, kids learn very quickly not to speak that language and ask those kinds of questions. And so the name of the game here is to be able to reintroduce that kind of language, to teach kids that kind of language and to make it acceptable as the lingua franca of the classroom. These are the kinds of things that we talk about. These are the kinds of things that we share. And the dream is, the goal is that ultimately that what we do in a Lev HaShavua once a week flows over into discussions that we have in the rest of the week. And as one of the kids said, the fact that we could be so honest and open about talking about stuff that we talk about in Tanakh is simply because we have those sessions every Friday, because otherwise people wouldn't be as open and as honest as they are. All of this, of course, couldn't happen without teachers doing it first, because if teachers aren't prepared to be open and vulnerable, then the kids never will be. And so one has to, and we all know that there are fabulous teachers of text, but they're not always the greatest teachers of kids. Or teachers who are great teachers of kids, but they can't necessarily do this kind of work because it's too uncomfortable. For us as adults, this kind of language can often be uncomfortable. If we were to go around the room right now and I were to ask you some of these questions that could be, a little more personal, I think people would feel awkward at first because we haven't created that kind of group dynamic or that kind of space. So the lion's share of the work here is about, at the beginning, is working with faculty, so that there is a faculty group, the people who do this meet together every 2 weeks. And we sit around the table and we do the exact same thing. What's your number for the day? What's going on for you? And it could be something personal, or it could be about this class is making me crazy, or whatever it is you want to talk about. But it's about that kind of sharing, and which builds a dynamic within that small group of faculty who then are much more likely to then take it to their classes and approach their classes with that same kind of openness and sensitivity. There's a lot more support for faculty from Israel. There are sort of meetings that we have with the people in Israel. In each school, there's now a cohort of 5 schools that have been doing this. All high schools for now that have been doing this, and there's a new cohort starting after this one. And within each school, there are a couple of leaders, and those leaders meet with the leaders in the other schools once a month to share and to grow and to come up with other ideas, getting support from the people in Israel. It can be very, very powerful work. I'll give you just one quick example and take questions if you have them. So towards the end of the year, I did this with a group of seniors, and I have 2 minutes, or somebody just gave me the victory sign. I had a group of students, and one student said she wanted to speak to everybody. And she got up and she started to talk about her eating disorder that nobody in the class knew about. They've been in class with this girl for 4 years, and nobody knew about it. And she just shared her experience and her struggles and all of that. That would be a guidance session, or that would be like a class session. But at the end I said, okay, I want everybody to go around the room and each person offer a tefillah on her behalf. And it begins, Hashem, or whatever you want to call Hashem in that moment, Hashem, Yehi Ratzon, may it be your will, that, and you fill in the blank. And to just go around the room and hear kids creating their own tefillot for this girl is not only a lesson in tefillah, it's a lesson in speaking to God that they will hopefully take with them as they go forward. Thank you.
Okay, I'm sorry that there aren't really time for questions.
Okay.
We're going to have to switch in a minute. But I don't see our next people
I didn't
yet.
get
So
kicked
if
out
some,
yet, so
yeah, we're
I'm
not
gonna
kicking
ask.
you out, but as soon as the next person comes in, you have a question?
Of course you do.
Sorry. So I'm a day school graduate. I would love to think that all of the teachers here have students that are mature enough to engage in the sort of exchange that you're talking about. I happen to be in one of those cohorts of like feral young people where like the more open and genuine the teacher was, the worse everybody behaved. And I'm kind of wondering, I feel like if students grew up with this sort of atmosphere from day one, I feel like you could really cultivate very like compassionate and open kids. Implementing this in places where students don't have that pedagogical experience, what would be your advice to teachers who find resistance from kids who are either like super cynical or super disruptive? How can you maintain that sort of environment if it's not, if there isn't buy-in from everyone? Or can you do it without buy-in from everyone?
So at the risk of sounding glib, what would you do if you were teaching a math class and you had kids like that? It's about sort of the rules of the game for your classroom, and when you have outliers, so you deal with the outliers. Doing this kind of work these days is very difficult because these days kids on every level have a very hard time listening to one another. They have a very hard time sitting still and attending. That requires training. That's part of what this process is about. And worst comes to worst when you end up with this, when you've tried all of that and you end up with a situation like that. So there are sort of protocols that Lifnai V'Lifnim has, or at least an outlook for what your mindset should be, sort of walking into a classroom like that. But I think it's possible in every class, because I think kids are dying to talk about themselves and one another. And that's sort of the way in. But.
First of all, great. Thank you. I don't need a mic.
Please
Okay.
speak on that.
All right. So we know there's such a shortage, right, of Limud Kodesh teachers, right? Is this something that requires there? You said that there's training, but is this something that takes a certain seasoned educator to be able to come to that vulnerability to be able to do this, or you've seen success also with new teachers?
Yeah, some of it is personality.
Right.
And so some people take to it much easier than others. And for others, it requires training and patience. But
How long does it take to train?
I've been training my whole life.
I was about to say, right, when is a teacher ready, right? And one quick comment on the successful outcome. What are the outcomes that you see?
Listen, this is affective education, and I don't think anybody's come up with a great way metric to evaluate that, though there are ways of measuring. At the very least, there's self-reporting from kids. And I didn't have the time, but I have testimonies from kids who have just said that this is very powerful. What are the implications for that going forward? So that's somebody's
Does it get them from an 8 to a 10?
I'm sorry?
Does it get them from an 8 to a 10?
I don't know that that's the goal, but anyway, thank you very much.